Meijin's 1943, night folds over the Navy Department like blackout curtains, and in the 10th Fleet plot room, the world becomes lines on linen. You're standing close enough to smell waxed floors and hot dust in the radio sets. A clerk snaps a pin into the North Atlantic, and the board shivers with fresh ink. Convoy tracks, wolf pack guesses, weather scars drifting east. Phones chatter, HFDF needles twitch. Somewhere above the ceiling, engines hum like a held breath. If you were standing at this board, your hand would hover, afraid of the next line you might draw. One wrong stroke could send 40 merchantmen into a steel ambush. You can hear the Morse bursts, short and nervous, hopping the Atlantic in broken syllables. You can hear rain hammering a roof that isn't here, because out there the rain is battering tin hats and canvas jackets and open decks, and the only shelter is distance and time. The problem has weight you can feel in your shoulders. The mid-Atlantic air gap yawns like a blind spot the size of a small country. Night attacks hide in fog and sleet. Escorts fight seas as hard as they fight torpedoes. In the first months of 1943, too many wakes ended in flame. Crews learned the taste of burned paint and bunker oil. Every pin on the board stands for a crew that's tired, cold, and counting minutes to dawn. Tonight the board says ONS 5 is in the weather's teeth. Heavy seas, visibility smashed to pieces. Bearings hint at a pack gathering ahead. Nothing definitive, just the way the radio noise clumps and thins, the way the needles point and hesitate. The air gap sits between the convoys and help like a dare. The escorts are stretched, fuel numbers penciled with tight lips. One more turn into the wrong quadrant, and you can already hear the tone of the next phone call. Clipped, flat, naming a ship that isn't there anymore. Then the idea that brought this room to life hums like a switch closing. A fleet with no ships, no hull numbers to polish, no decks to swab, yet the authority to bend ships and squadrons across an ocean. Fight with time, fight with information. The map becomes a weapon. The phone becomes a rudder. The chalk line becomes the cut that spares a city a winter without fuel. You can feel the mood of the watch change by inches. Fear never leaves, but it shares space with focus. A petty officer drags a grease pencil and curves a new track north by a weather seam the forecasters swear will hold through morning. A lieutenant takes a bearing off a HFDF spike that looks like nothing and might be everything and plots a phantom gate where a pack could form. Somebody on the far wall calls out wind strength over the Greenland-Iceland gap. The officer in charge nods once, a small approval, and the phones blink again. Black May hasn't earned its name yet. It's only the first hours, a threshold. But you can sense the hinge creaking. The 10th Fleet is weeks old as an institution and years old in frustration. This room is the answer to all those nights when convoys blundered into jaws because the Atlantic was too wide and our eyes were too slow. Tonight, the room decides to be faster. Decisions that used to crawl through 3 commands will sprint. Intelligence that used to sit in a pouch will ride the wire. Hunters will be sent where the prey thinks it's safest. If you listen close, you'll hear the future trying to speak through static. Escort carriers throwing wind across small decks. Long-range aircraft cutting the gap. Destroyers turning towards sound instead of away. That's for later parts of this story. Right now, it's you, the board, and the hum. The room smells like pencils ground to nubs and coffee left too long. The clock's second hand taps out a dare. The operators trade glances that say, quietly, do it. Draw the line. The watch officer commits. The diversion route arcs like a scythe around the suspected gate. A message rattles down a landline to a coastal station. Pass to the convoy commodore. Adjust course at 0300. Another call vectors a small group to sweep the gap like a broom. Thin coverage, but better than none. A third line reaches for a long-winged aircraft that might find a slit in the weather by daybreak. The plan is fragile and brave. It's built out of minutes and nerve. You're not just watching a board. You're watching fear lose ground at tempo. The room's voice tightens and sharpens. Orders repeat back cleaner on the second red. The clerk slides the pins along new paths. The chalk squeaks. The phone bells ring in a rhythm that starts to feel like control. In the corner, a typewriter hammers out a summary that will be history by morning. Before we go deeper, do one thing that keeps stories like this alive. Tap subscribe to What If Wars. It costs you seconds and buys us the chance to keep telling the wars behind the war. The rooms, the choices, the people who bent outcomes without firing a gun. A handset lifts. A voice, thin with distance, reports a shift in enemy transmissions. Bearings that had clustered to the southwest are changing tone and sliding off the edge of expectation. The operator marks it, hesitates. The lieutenant leans in, reads the ink, and does not speak. Outside the room, the city is dark. In here, the ocean is bright with pencil scars and hope. The phones stop for a breath long enough that everyone can hear the clock again. 1, 2, 3 ticks. And the watch officer says, quietly, "Hold." On the map, the arc of safety hangs midair, unconfirmed, a promise waiting to be true. An intercept arrives, a thin ribbon of words pulled from noise. It suggests the pack has shifted, moved where the diversion points, or away from it, or nowhere at all. The clerk's hand freezes half an inch from the board, and the room hears its own breathing. Then, all at once, the lines, the needles, the voices seem to step back from the edge, and the board goes suddenly quiet. May 22, 1943. Same room, same humming ceiling, but the tempo is tighter, coffee is stronger, the board has a new skin of chalk. Admiral Ernest J. King steps in like a storm in a dark suit, not to linger, just to make the air sharper. He's not here to steer ships, he's here to steer time. Beside him, Admiral Francis S. Lowe, quiet as a metronome, watches the pins as if he can hear them thinking. Orders don't travel by ceremony here, they jump. A runner breaks the line of desks with a cream envelope stamped for restricted hands. Ultra, thin paper, heavy gravity. The watch officer opens it with the small, deliberate motions of a man diffusing a fuse. A call sign we've been chasing spits out of a German grid square 2 nights old. Frequencies and chatter density suggest regrouping, not dispersal. Lowe leans over the map, asks one question that is really 4. Bearings, weather, fuel, cover. The answers come in clipped triplets from 3 corners of the room. HFDF confirms 2 cuts. A petty officer lays a ruler against the board and draws 2 neat scars that meet in cold water. 3rd cut pending. The operator holds his pencil over the 3rd line, like a gambler praying to geometry. Phones rattle, bearings repeat back, 80, copy, 2, 7, copy, standby. A VLR Liberator out on the edge of the world crackles in. Patchy, but the gist is there. Break in the overcast east of the convoy lanes by dawn, miles thin, but real. The room's spine straightens. A flight watch scribbles a divert across a transparent overlay, slides it onto the board, and suddenly the Atlantic has a door where there wasn't one. King doesn't give a speech. He gives a nod you can feel past your ribs. Do it. Lowe translates nod to pressure. Reroute ONS 5 degrees north at 300. Make the change gradual. If they're stacked south, we want the pack chasing ghosts. Voice circuits carry the order out, like nerve impulses. A clerk reads it back. The line becomes law. Authority here looks like 3 actions in 60 seconds. 1. A destroyer group to the west is retasked without ceremony, pulled off a bland patrol, and bent toward the triangulated gate. 2. Argentia's tower gets a short, hard request. Launch a long-range bird to the hole in the clouds the moment light will take a wing. 3. A small escort from Newfoundland, fueled to the gills and barely rested, is told to knife into the gap and sweep by sound, not sight. If you were standing at the board, you'd feel a new kind of silence spread. Work silence, the kind that makes fast hands steadier. The OODA loop shrinks to something you can hold in your palm. Observe. 3 bearings, a decrypt, a weather slit. Orient, draw, overlay, argue, decide. Decide, 2 orders, 1 divert. Act, phones lit, pencils moving, aircraft crews woken by a boot on a bunk. What used to take a day takes minutes. You can watch fear losing its job. The board widens for a breath to show the ocean's other stories. A northbound HX convoy, HX234, rides higher water outside the immediate drama, and even that lane draws benefit from this room. A tiny adjustment here, a delayed departure there, and a wolf pack finds only empty sea where meat should be. The 10th Fleet's reach isn't ships, it's seams. It's the practice of closing doors in the dark. Lowe moves like a conductor who knows the score and trusts his players. He asks for the third HFDF cut. It comes in late and brittle, but it comes. The lines cross a few degrees off the first guess, still in killing water. The watch officer recalculates time to intercept for the retasked destroyers. Fuel math is ugly. They can make the sprint if the sea stops punching them for an hour. The sea won't. They go anyway. Phones throw sparks of human detail. A Commodore's voice, hoarse and steady, acknowledging the gradual swing north. An escort captain asking for permission to burn a little extra speed to hold his screen's flank. A ground controller counting down cloud height with a voice like gravel in winter. The room does not say no. It says affirmative in 10 versions, and every one of them means hurry. Another decrypt fragment slides in. It is not a golden ticket. It's a smudge with a hint of intent. German signals shift tone, tighter discipline for a few exchanges. The kind of sudden neatness that means a senior hand has joined the net. The lieutenant at the center desk doesn't look up. He moves 2 pins half an inch, and the Atlantic tilts. "Assume regroup," he says, like telling someone to put on a coat. You can smell warm wiring now, and the paper has that faint iron tang of ink drying in a room that runs a little too hot. A yeoman types a summary with a rhythm that syncs with the clock. Minutes stack, decisions land, the loop stays tight. The air outside the building is heavy with spring rain. In here, it tastes like pencil dust and intent. The first micro payoff arrives on a radio that sounds like it's speaking through a burlap sack. An escort reports a faint contact on sound in the lane the room just carved. No visual, no depth marks yet. But it is enough to tell the board it's not dreaming. The second twist follows before the smile can settle. Barometers fall, and the weather desk murmurs the words nobody wants. Front advancing faster, ceiling dropping. The good door in the sky may slam. King is already halfway to the door, mission finished. He does not need to linger over weather. Low tightens the weave. If we lose the hole, the ocean goes back to knives. Push the sweep closer, tight pattern. If they fire, we want our counter already in motion. A junior officer barely old enough to shave clean writes tight pattern on a scratch pad and underlines it twice. In this room, underlines become doctrine until the next AAR proves better. Time compresses to a blade's edge. The third payoff lands hard and clean. HF-DF bearings triangulate again. Deeper behind the convoy's old path, confirming the pack is late to where the merchants used to be and early to where we want them not to go. The decision window shrinks to heartbeats. The room does what it was built to do, decide faster than fear. On the board, ONS-5's new arc bends away from teeth. Off to the side, a note goes up for that other convoy, HX-234, confirming the open lane holds for 12 hours if nobody gets clever. The operators breathe a fraction deeper. The work never celebrates. It acknowledges. A messenger at the weather desk clears his throat. Low meets his eyes and doesn't blink. Front moving in. Visibility will drop to nothing by nightfall. The room hums louder. Phones in staggered chorus. The plot's lines sweat under the lamps. Options narrow, but the will in the room doesn't. Then we make our own eyes, Lowe says, not raising his voice. Orders go out like flares you can't see, form a hunter-killer screen overnight, not a net, but a moving fist. Destroyers and corvettes to knit the dark with sound. Aircraft on standby for any slit in the ceiling. Escorts to shift to aggressive search patterns along the suspected gate. The words go, and somewhere men grab gear and run, and somewhere else someone counts depth charges and wishes for more. The ceiling drops as promised. The windows turn to slate. The radio gets wetter, voices farther away. On the board, the pins hold their ground like small acts of faith. A final handset lifts. Confirmation received, groups turning, screens forming, night accommodations made on lightless decks. And then the room listens to the weather press its face against the glass, and the decision has nowhere left to live but out at sea, where a line of ships leans into darkness and men tune their ears for a sound that means a target they cannot see. May 3rd, 1943. Night air claws at your lungs on a small deck that pretends to be an airfield. The escort carrier bounces in long, stubborn rolls, its wake boiling white in the dark. A signal lamp blinks. A deck leader's glove slices the wind. The plane commits. Tires thump, engine howls climb a note. And for one stretched heartbeat, the aircraft hangs in nothing before the bow drops away and the wings bite. Radio chatter is clipped, almost bored in its professionalism. A voice says, "Feet wet, turning to sector," and the ocean swallows the sound. You can smell avgas and wet canvas and the oil that never quite leaves your hands. The flight deck wind has a taste like pennies. Below, metal works in slow groans as the ship's shoulders seize. On the edge of the deck, a sailor squints into rain that stings like shot. Somewhere inside, a chart glows under a red lamp. The hole in the cloud that might be there at dawn. A HF-DF fix that could be a gate or a ghost. The carrier is small, stubborn, and loud. The kind of ship that makes its own luck. The first payoff comes quick and mean. The radar operator in the belly of the plane reads a smear that wants to be a periscope wake or just the sea lying. The pilot turns anyway. The observer calls range and drift through teeth that chatter in the cold. "Stand by," the pilot says, and a thumb hovers over a switch wired to a brutal idea. The Leigh Light snaps on, a white sun punching the night flat for a handful of seconds. Ocean turns to hammered silver. A conning tower gleams like the back of a whale and then flinches. The submarine throws itself into a crash dive, but those seconds are a promise. You're seen, and that changes everything. The light dies. The night returns angrier. Spray rattles the fuselage. The pilot claws for the right angle. The depth charge release clanks like closing a lid on a coffin you can't see. The ocean absorbs violence, then offers only silence. The crew banks in circles, sweating into their flight suits. The smell of hot electrics thick in the cabin. On the second pass, the radar loses the contact completely. The sea wins this round because that's what the sea does. The plane marks the spot, calls it in, and rides the dark home with a silence that isn't failure so much as appetite. Back on the surface, a destroyer in the hunter-killer screen noses through black water like a dog on scent. ASDIC sings in a thin metallic voice. Contact, bearing green 20, range decreasing. The bridge repeats it down. Men move in a practiced storm. Hedgehog crews fumble no steps. Their hands know the drill even when brains lag from lack of sleep. The ship throws a forward pattern, spiked mortars punching out ahead, arcing, vanishing. Then that hardest second in sea fighting, waiting to hear nothing. Depth charges boom and roll your guts. They shout the story of energy spent. Hedgehog only speaks when it hits. The crew holds collective breath. The sea hisses back. One heartbeat, two, then a single clean thud that doesn't echo like the rest. It bites. The men on deck look at each other and do not cheer. They mark it. They listen for air and oil. They listen because sound is proof when eyes are blind. In the plot room ashore, the pins jump a finger's width. A clerk writes a time in the margin. OODA, 10 May 4th, and the board swallows it. The operators don't savor, they move. A junior officer reaches for a card from the previous night's after-action report. Last known depth, adjust plus 150 FT. He underlines it and pushes the card to the sound desk like a reminder from the future. Operations research here is a habit, not a department. Measure, change, measure again. Somebody recalculates a pattern width by a yard, and it matters. Morning is a rumor. The ceiling refuses to lift. The carrier turns into wind again, a blunt little miracle keeping speed in wicked seas. A second plane claws off the deck. The crew knows where to look this time. The fix tighter. The mind sharper from the contact that half got away. Radar map jitters, then steadies. Another smear. The pilot commits to the same brutal trick. Switch. Daylight explodes from the wing. The ocean flattens into detail. Foam ropes. A lens flare off steel. And there, the lip of a conning tower knifing down. Charges go. The crew rides the blast. On the next circle, a flower of oil, ugly and rainbowed, smears the chop. It is not victory. It is evidence. Names matter when luck starts to break your way. In the mid-Atlantic, USS Bogue carries the hunt like a chip on its shoulder, cycling aircraft through slits in the weather, pushing out where big carriers won't waste their time. Further west, USS Card drills the same habit into men who haven't yet lost the beginner's reverence for staying alive. Their job is unsentimental. Make the air gap smaller by acting as if it doesn't exist. A HF-DF fix becomes a vector, becomes a sprint. And the ocean starts to feel less like an enemy and more like a very large board you can influence. The second twist snaps colder. A contact gained in the afternoon turns out to be a wreck or a whale or Elysium sea state. The destroyer burns fuel and mends patience for noises that unmake themselves. Up above, the weather closes the sky like a fist. The pilots circle on instruments over water that wants to slap them into it. Every decision is a choice to spend a little more human. The room ashore tightens the loop again. Shorter sweeps, tighter patterns, fewer chances left to luck. It's the small improvements that carry the day when the big picture still looks like fog. A sonar rating calls out a faint layer shadow deeper than yesterday. The attack leader shifts depth settings without drama. Down 50, he says, because the card on his console says, adjust plus 150, FT. And the last AAR earned that underline in sweat. The Hedgehog crew throws another pattern. The ship rides its own noise. The men on the rail stare into a dark that refuses to confess. Late evening, the carrier's PA cracks to life with the voice of a man who has swallowed too much rain. Stand by to recover. Deck crews move like a single organism. Arresting gear hums. The first plane hits wires, jerks to a stop, sits panting. The second circles once more for drama that nobody asked for, and nails it on the bounce. The flight deck smells like hot rubber and relief. Below, a radio man with salt drying in his hair writes up the contact report, precise and plain. Up the chain, the plot room accepts the new marks and nudges ONS-5's curve into cleaner water. Each small proof, oil sheen, thud, radar flare, stacks into something that feels like momentum. Night deepens to that hour when the human body wonders why it has ever done anything brave. The screen tightens. Orders simplify. Talk less, hear more. A lookout on a Corvette rubs rain from eyes without much hope of seeing, and sees anyway. A smear of orange where the horizon should be blank. He blinks once, twice. The smear grows into the shape of a flare. It's wrong, and it's right. Distress means a friend in trouble, or someone wants you to think so. The voice on the bridge flattens. Flare bearing 270, range unclear. The captain does the math that nobody can do for him. Fuel low, seas bad, wolves clever. He calls it in. The report rides a cable to a desk that has to decide what kind of fire the ocean is showing. On the carrier, on the destroyer, in the Corvette, men angle their heads toward the dark as if ears could see. The flare burns down to a smear and then to memory. Someone marks the bearing on a chart. Someone else says nothing at all. The room ashore folds the new line into the web, quiet as a hand on a shoulder. A voice on the net asks the only question that matters. Do we close? The engines answer before anyone else can. The bows turn. The ships lean into it. And on the horizon the light blooms again, brighter, like an offer you can't afford to refuse. Is it a trap or a chance? April 29th, 1943. Fog sits on the North Atlantic like a low ceiling you could touch if you dared. Convoy. ONS-5 leans westward into rough water. Stacks of blacked-out ships shouldering the swell, escorts thumping through spray with screws that sound tired. You can feel the fatigue from here. It lives in the radio pauses. In the slow way, a helmsman repeats back a course change on a night when language has weight. The board in the 10th Fleet room wears a lace of pencil arcs and angled slashes. HF, DF cuts stack like teeth. A false calm settles, and that's worst of all. Just after midnight, April 30th, bearings begin to lean toward a gate forming ahead. The plot's lines argue with the weather. Wind climbing, visibility pinched to yards. A message ticks through, torch signals seen, and no one trusts it because wolf packs learn your habits as you learn theirs. The board answers with drift. ONS-5's track slews 5 degrees, a long, patient bend meant to take the convoy around a point a stranger can't see. In the sea lanes, that feels like faith. In the plot room, it feels like pressure lifted by an ounce. May 1st comes in hard, seas peaking ugly, crews cinched to rails and routines. A Corvette's engines cough. An escort asks permission to shuffle its screen to cover a vulnerable flank. Granted. Through the fog, the convoy keeps its breathing. You can hear it in the tone of acknowledgments, tired but steady, the kind of steadiness that buys survivors. 02.10, May 4th. The mark that hit the board last night turns into sound in the water. A destroyer riding the screen slides over a whisper on sonar that refuses to be a wave. She turns into it, Hedgehog forward arcs punching out, crew counting heartbeats by habit they don't remember learning. 1 quiet second, 2, then the single thud that tells grown men to let go of breath. In the plot room, the pin moves a fingertip and does not look dramatic. At sea, someone tastes cordite and salt and thinks about sleep for the first time in a day. The night rush comes without ceremony. 23:15 May 4. Torpedoes in the water, fast and cruel, white wakes like ropes across black glass. One merchantman takes a hit and lists. A voice on the net loses half a syllable and finds it again. An escort throws a template of depth charges until the ocean feels like it's cracking. Chaos visits and leaves an address. The voice circuits jump to a higher frequency of calm. The Commodore speaks low and clean. Maintain station. You would not think it possible to hold a formation in this weather, under this pressure, but they do. The counterpunch was written onto chalk days ago. The diversion lane wakes up on the board as a set of calls push to sea like a heartbeat. Turn now. Escorts peel, screen flexes, the long line of ships ripples around an invisible hook. Reinforcements vector from a hunter-killer group that has been gnawing at the air gap's edge since dawn. A gap in the overcast opens like a mistake, and a VLR aircraft slides through, doesn't waste its words, and goes hunting. Just before dawn, May 5th, a destroyer makes contact so close the soundman thinks his gear is lying. It isn't. The ship throws Hedgehog again. This time the pattern bites twice, 2 thuds that sound like small doors slamming in a flooded corridor. Oil rises later, a smear rainbowing a black sea that keeps its secrets even when it bleeds them. Up on the carrier's deck miles away, a pilot stares at the weather and knows he will fly anyway. Down below, men load more depth charges and whisper about fuel in arithmetic nobody likes. By afternoon, May 5th, the fog thickens to wool and the radio feels damp in the hand. Escorts fuss with the screen, one burning speed to hold the starboard edge, another falling back to nurse a cranky shaft. Merchants count the seconds between escort shapes sliding in and out of mist like guardian animals. Crews sleep in 3-minute pieces and wake with their boots already on. If you want to understand morale, listen to how an officer thanks a rating for coffee, like he's thanking him for a lung. Just after dusk, May 5th, bearings that had layered to the south peel away. A German transmitter tightens its discipline and then frays. That's not statistics. It's the feeling of a pack losing the thread. The board reads it first. Pins ease back from the convoy's new lane. Overlays change without drama. At sea, the first sign is simpler. The ocean sounds different. Less teeth in it. Not safe, never safe, but less certain of its killing. Here's the small comparison that tells the big story without turning into a ledger. Last month, too often a sighting became a lost contact, became a memorial. In this week, the exchange rate starts to flip. For every freighter that doesn't come home, 1 U-boat fails to, then 2. You don't put that on a poster. You feel it in the backs of the men sitting on ready boxes who don't stare so hard at the deck anymore. Midnight leans into May 6th. Fuel numbers look like bad dreams. A Corvette captain taps his gauge and swears quietly because the needle doesn't care. He keeps station anyway. The hunter-killer group sprints and then trims speed to listen. The air crew tries a hole in the cloud so thin it might be a rumor and finds a periscope wake that vanishes, then reappears where it shouldn't. The pilot doesn't argue with chance. Switch. Light. 15 seconds of day. A conning tower flashes. Charges fall. The sea records the conversation in thumps and bubbles and the thick silence that follows. Later, a slick rises. Later still, nothing at all. The ocean pays in proof when it feels like it. The psychological turn is never an announcement. It's a change in temperature. U-boat commanders start to hedge, to signal less cleanly, to cut wide instead of slicing in. The pack scatters because the board keeps asking new questions faster than the old answers reach the water. In the room ashore, operators draw straighter lines. On the sea, Escort sees initiative in quick, hard moves that say, "We're not the ones being hunted anymore." A merchant skipper, eyes red and voice sandpaper, calls a near miss close but not close enough, and gets told to hold course like he was born to it. An escort hears a ping that might be a fish and turns like it is, because nobody pays for caution with anything but sleep. Dawn lifts on May 6th like a pale hand. The wind eases one stubborn notch. The line of ships, patched, wet, stubborn, keeps its shape. On the plot board, lanes open where last night there were gates. Pins slide west with a confidence that has room for breath. Somebody in the room lets his shoulders drop a half-inch and realizes they've been up near his ears for 3 days. The operators exhale, not because the ocean has become kind, but because the math of survival finally favors them on a morning that smells like pencil shavings and coffee left too long. They've beat back a week that could have been a funeral procession. The board shows space, and space is mercy, but the sea keeps accounts in its own ink, and it never closes a ledger. The room goes quiet enough to hear the clock again, and a watchstander rubs chalk off his fingers and reaches for the next strip of paper rolling out of the radio. Because even when lanes open and men breathe, the water out there still holds its secrets. May 7th, 1943, daylight finds the plot room quieter than it has any right to be. Pins are fewer, routes are cleaner. The grease pencil squeaks less because there's less to correct. A junior watchstander rubs chalk off his fingers and stares at the board as if it might finally blink. He isn't thinking about the ocean as a monster now. He's thinking of it as a space that can be managed, watched, shaped. The phones still ring. They will always ring, but the voices on them have changed key. Escorts report fuel taken, formations re-knit, damage tallied, and somehow less than the ghost in their heads predicted. Air crews land with cheeks raw from wind and eyes raw from fatigue, and they talk about slits in the weather like old friends who finally showed. In the room, someone lights a new pencil and draws the next lane with a steady hand. What changed? Not the sea. The sea is the same faithless partner it's always been. What changed is tempo. What changed is a chain of seconds. Intercepts read faster, bearings triangulated faster, routes redrawn faster, weapons retuned faster after each mistake. The 10th Fleet didn't buy more hours. It spent the ones it had with a ruthlessness that felt like mercy to men on the water. A fleet with no ships taught fleets with ships how to move like information. You can walk the room and see the lesson in objects. The board, the living map that turned noise into pictures. The phones, authority writing wires instead of waiting for paperwork. The watch logs, short, sharp entries that show how practice became doctrine overnight. And on a side table, a stack of after-action reports with lines drawn through yesterday's habits and new lines written in the margins. Adjust depth, tighten sweep, reroute sooner, trust the third cut. The whole room is a memory device for learning. Every shift makes the next one smarter. The ocean noticed. U-boat commanders who once pressed in with clean confidence began to edge and hesitate, to break contact early, to slip deep and away because their luck stopped caching. The air gap, that hateful hole in the sky, got smaller in practice even before it closed on the map. Escort carriers built runways where there weren't any. Long-range patrols put teeth into places that used to be all gums. Destroyers learned to attack into sound with a forward fist instead of throwing charges behind and praying. The center, this room, held. Weeks later, the board would show it in a way even timid numbers couldn't hide. U-boat losses spiking to levels Berlin hadn't planned for. Convoy losses bending down hard enough to feel in shipyards and kitchens and barracks across 2 continents. Not zero, not safe, never that, but a slope that told the truth. A hinge had turned. The campaign that had once felt like a dark tide now felt like a tide with a schedule. The Atlantic was still enormous, but it had fewer places to hide. The watchstanders who lived through those days wouldn't make speeches about it. They would just point and say, "Here," and mean the arc that kept ONS 5 out of a shaped gate, or the 3-minute window when a decision rode a wire to a destroyer and shaved a mile off a turn, or the night an aircraft made day for 15 seconds and the ocean gave up a secret it didn't plan to. The stories they told were small because small was where the war was won. One bearing, one overlay, one pattern, one choice made while coffee went cold. After Black May, the rhythm changed everywhere else. U-boats shifted to survive, forced deeper, forced wider, forced toward tactics that paid less for more risk. Allied ships kept moving, steel and grain and fuel, and men crossed like blood through arteries finally unclogged. The war on land would still ask horrors of millions, but the road to those fronts stayed open because sailors and airmen and clerks and cryptanalysts and watch officers learned to treat time like a weapon and fear like something you can't afford to waste. If you step back from the board far enough, you can see a longer line, one that runs past 1943 into the rooms we build now, when we need to see a world too big to fit in a window. The 10th Fleet's triumph wasn't magic steel or perfect machines. It was fusion, intelligence poured into operations, technology strapped to discipline, people trusted to decide quickly and live with it. It was the habit of measuring and changing, the humility to admit the ocean doesn't care, and the stubbornness to care anyway. And it was human. It was a yeoman who typed faster when the phones went wild. A rating who underlined adjust plus 150 FT because last night proved it mattered. A lieutenant who learned to say affirmative cleanly when a commander needed clarity more than comfort. A pilot who threw a switch and made day out of night for 15 seconds so somebody else had a better minute. A watchstander who rubbed chalk off his fingers and understood that every line he drew was a line someone would sail. The room at last. Afternoon light finds the edges of the map and makes the ocean look almost gentle. Pins are sparse, lanes clear. A watch changes over. Men stretch backs and roll shoulders and pass one another the kind of glance that means we got away with it today and we'll pay attention tomorrow. The board is wiped and redraws itself under steady hands. The hum overhead is softer. The engines in the wall are just the city again. You can leave the room now. The door swings open on a corridor that smells like paper and wool, the kind of smell that sticks in your clothes and rides home with you. Outside, traffic goes by with the casual rhythm of a place that doesn't know it was just defended by pencil and nerve. That's fine. That's what victory looks like when it's working. Remember the sound of the phones. Remember the feel of the chalk. Remember that the ocean didn't get smaller, the people got faster. The 10th Fleet was a set of rooms and a set of habits that turned fear into work and work into survival. In a week that could have broken them, they bent the curve instead. They won back a piece of the water, and with it, time. The content in this video is compiled from multiple sources. If anything needs correction, please comment below. See you next time.